that threaten the region's long-term development. Last year showed several reasons for optimism. Cyclical industries recovered gradually. Consumer demand and confidence levels increased. More economic activities resumed. At the same time, the emergence of more contagious COVID-19 variants, inflationary pressures, debt burdens, and heightened geopolitical risks are dampening hopes for an immediate economic recovery. Pandemic scarring remains a big concern if setbacks in poverty reduction, gender equality, and education are not immediately addressed. Other concerns include uncertainties such as armed conflict involving key global actors. There are also looming threats of food security and energy price shocks. As we approach the halfway point for delivering on the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, Asia and the Pacific needs to galvanize efforts to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The region needs to get back on a virtuous development path. The latest economic statistics show divergent growth trajectories. Some economies have yet to return to their pre-pandemic growth rates. Others are doing better. Providing opportunities for upward social mobility, especially for those who faced the greatest challenge during the pandemic, is key to ensure nobody is left behind. Development policies and interventions should also avoid short-term measures that only provide temporary solutions to systemic problems. Asia and the Pacific need to tackle climate change and other vulnerabilities that threaten the region's long-term development. Data and statistics can be used to illuminate bright spots of recovery and socio-economic prospects, as well as critical junctures along the way. They can also help us identify where more intervention may be needed to keep vulnerable populations from falling behind. The region's development in recent decades has given more people access to infrastructure and services that improve their lives. Transportation networks have gotten better. Electricity generation capacity has been enhanced. Nonetheless, disparities remain. Data shows how innovation can help create new and greener economic opportunities and more productive jobs. This can especially benefit the millions of people who were pushed into poverty by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, many economies in the region still lag behind in investing in research and development, which is key to innovation. Inclusiveness is also important. Development plans must reduce risks that affect the most vulnerable. They must provide more balanced opportunities and prospects for upward social mobility for everyone. Developing Asia has been increasingly integrated into global value chains. Since 2018, uncertainties in the supply of semiconductors have posed risks for developing Asian economies that participate in technology manufacturing value chains. COVID-19 increased this risk, as unprecedented demand for electronics and motor vehicles further squeezed semiconductor supplies. The analysis of global value chains provides insights into the impact of the global chip shortage on developing Asia. It also looks at the region's vulnerability to reshoring of chip manufacturing by trade partners. The pandemic has provided a compelling opportunity to look at ways that economies can become more agile in responding to development challenges. Effective policies, developed with the help of accurate and integrated data and statistics, can move the region forward. ADB's Key Indicators 2022 helps provide this data to support knowledge sharing among policymakers, development practitioners, government officials, researchers, students, media, and the public. ADB is committed to delivering trusted data to build, support, and strengthen the region's capacity to be more prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable.
All right, a pleasant afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Stat Speaks, Colloquium on the Statistical Sciences. This is brought to you by the UP School of Statistics, and today is extra special because this colloquium is in partnership with the Asian Development Bank, or ADB. So thank you very much for this opportunity again, ADB. For everyone, thank you for joining us, and I hope this will be a very meaningful endeavor for all of us. By the way, my name is 𝗔𝗗𝗕𝗀𝗟𝗟𝗢𝗓, a faculty member of the UP School of Statistics and a member of the school's research committee. I am glad to be your moderator for today's event. Now, this colloquium presents the highlights of ADB's key indicators for Asia and the Pacific, looking at the economic performance of the region and its achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. There's really a need to take a look at the bank's findings on the impact of the pandemic on social mobility prospects of the most vulnerable population, and how we can support progress towards achieving these SDGs by engaging on several engaging platforms. I'm sure we have a lot to talk about, so let me now introduce our esteemed speakers. Dr. Art Martinez works on Sustainable Development Goals indicator compilation, particularly on poverty statistics and big data analytics. Prior to joining ADB, he was a research fellow at the University of Queensland, where he also got his doctorate in social statistics. Dr. Daniel Boller is a statistician under data science in the Statistics and Data Innovation Unit of ADB. His work includes building statistical capacity and leveraging innovative data sources and methods for development. Prior to joining ADB, he studied economics in Mainz, Lucerne, and Cologne, and completed a PhD and postdoctoral fellowship at the University of St. Gallen and Stanford. Last but not the least, Ms. Rose Ann Dumaya supports the poverty statistics, big data analytics, and systems of national account teams in ADB. Prior to joining the bank, she was an associate economist for World Bank and Department of Agriculture Philippine Rural Development Project. She studied agricultural economics at UP Los Baños. Everyone, let's give our esteemed speakers a warm round of virtual applause. All right, so thank you very much. Now, if you will have any questions about their presentations later, we would ask you to kindly reserve them first. You can jot them down or you can take note of them, as we will be having a dedicated time later on for an open forum after all the three presentations. But surely, we are looking forward to hearing them later. So now, I guess it's time for our presentation proper. Bring it, Sir Art.
Thank you very much, Sir Gian, and good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned by Sir Gian, we are from the Asian Development Bank, particularly the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department's Statistics and Data Innovation Unit. So, of course, before we start, let me, on behalf of our team, let me thank everyone. Our sincere appreciation also goes to, of course, Dean Joseph Ryan Lansangan, Dr. Ginny Evidente, Sir Gian Roy, Jo Marie, and the rest of the University of the Philippines School of Statistics community for giving us this opportunity to share what our team has been doing. I'm sure that many of us here recognize the important role of data and how it plays in policy making. This is further highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic because that situation underscored the importance of high quality, timely data to create effective policy. Indeed, in a dynamic environment where scenarios change rapidly, of course, we need appropriate data to be able to develop suitable responses. So before we start, let me just give you a quick background of what our team has been doing. So through ADB statistical capacity building initiatives in partnership with other development organizations, our team is committed to collaborate with national statistical systems across Asia and the Pacific as they respond to development challenges confronting us by, say, harnessing digital platforms for data collection, integrating conventional and innovative data sources into the compilation of vital socioeconomic indicator. In addition to our statistical capacity building efforts, our team also compiles a wide range of knowledge products, which bring into focus important development issues. So today you'll hear about the key findings, as mentioned, from the 2022 edition of Key Indicators for Asia and the Pacific, which we call KI. This is ADB's statistical flagship publication. So KI serves a valuable resource for data on a number of development indicators, as alluded earlier. That includes this Sustainable Development Goals. So this year's edition of KI focuses on one important development topic, which is social mobility. This is very important in the context of the crucial period where we find ourselves more than 2 years into what the United Nations calls the decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. In fact, if we take a step back, it is notable that over the past several decades, before we adopted the SDGs, our region had gone through an incredible journey from poverty to wider prosperity. However, amidst that rosy trends, before the pandemic, we already noted hints of different development challenges, such as lower pace of poverty reduction compared to what we had seen in the past, expanding inequality, risk posed by climate change, among others. And all of this are compounded by the severe economic impact of the pandemic. This could further contribute to crystallization of inequalities, which in turn may leave disadvantaged people behind if we don't address these issues urgently. So my colleague, Ms. Rose Andumayas, will provide more insights onto this topic as she walks us through the key takeaways of KI. And then after her, Daniel is a data scientist from our team, will give us specific examples how we are contributing to our promoting a new paradigm of social and economic development by using innovative data. In particular, he will share this year's KI special supplement topic, which focuses on natural language processing and social media data, and how we can get more nuanced insights on different development topics using that type of data. I think I've spoken too much, so let me give the screen to Anne, who will share us the key takeaways of the main book of KI. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Art, and good afternoon, everyone. So the report shows how most economies in the region have gradually bounced back in varying degrees from the knock-on impact caused by the pandemic. But there are hints of divergent growth paths as some economies have not reverted back to their pre-pandemic growth pace, while others are showing more robust economic performance. As there are several uncertainties which, if left unaddressed, may contribute to widening gaps between the rich and poor, our path should be illuminated by development models that are anchored on resilience, innovation, sustainability, and inclusiveness. Today, we will discuss about social mobility, as Art mentioned, and examine relevant data before, during, and after the COVID-19 pandemic. We will also zoom into how vulnerable populations are faring during this period. So let me start by asking, what is social mobility and why do we need it? So technically speaking, the concept of social mobility can be defined as the transitions between two socioeconomic status levels over time. Now, it is important to examine the concept of social mobility to gain more nuanced view of the long-term inequalities between the rich and poor. It also provides insights for policymaking. For instance, temporary increases in the prevalence of poverty due to economic shocks may merit less policy or structural intervention in areas that enjoy high social mobility, or where the poor may have good chances of getting out of poverty eventually. On the other hand, increased poverty levels in areas with low social mobility or where poverty may be generational due to some factors beyond the person's control could be more problematic and may require strong policy intervention. Social mobility covers a wide scope and can be viewed from different perspectives. It is important to know which lens is being used as it may yield different results. So the pattern depicted here in the first figure corroborates with the theory that worsening economic inequality can potentially undermine social mobility by skewing the distribution of resources, which contributes to the hardening of socioeconomic stratification within educational systems and labor markets. On the other hand, the second panel of the figure illustrates the correlation between enablers in social mobility and extreme poverty reduction, based on pre-pandemic experiences of select developing Asian economies. Here we observe that areas with higher scores in social mobility enablers also experience generally faster pace of extreme poverty reduction, with more equitable distribution of economic opportunities, which are associated with societies enjoying better social mobility enablers. It takes less time for those born in lower social class to reach higher status, as their economic prospects are not strongly anchored on their initial socioeconomic status. Now that we have established the importance of having upward social mobility, the next logical question to ask is, how our region is faring with respect to social mobility? Here, the first figure provides a simple socioeconomic yardstick to gauge of intergenerational absolute social mobility in Asia and the Pacific. Results from the World's Value Survey suggested that while majority feel their standard of living have improved relative to their parents, a considerable amount of Asian feels that it didn't change or even deteriorated. Lower income individuals are less likely to feel that they experience upward intergenerational social mobility. But on the other hand, using a different survey-based data panel, we can see from the second chart that a considerable segment of several developing economies' population were unable to break out of poverty before the pandemic. Also, measures of social mobility based on education show that among those whose parents did not have tertiary education, the proportion of respondents from different cohorts group who obtained higher levels of education than their parents, which is a measure of absolute mobility, remains much higher in developed economies. Albeit, there is increasing trend in some of ADB's developing member economies. Measures of relative educational mobility show stronger intergenerational persistence over time in developing economies. So this figure is based on individuals from the World Bank Studies 1980s cohort who were born to parents in the bottom half of the population in education, then assesses what proportion of those individuals have reached the top quartile in education. The results suggest that education mobility among people from lower socioeconomic classes was low in most economies. In fact, only few economies had at least 20% of the 1980s cohorts coming from the bottom half in education to reach the top quartile. The pandemic has made it more difficult for poor to climb the socioeconomic ladder, mainly driven by significant job losses and limited access to social safety nets. The impacts of the crisis have weighed most heavily on the poorest and most vulnerable population across Asia and the Pacific. So in this slide, longitudinal data collected from 2 waves of rapid surveys conducted by the Asian Development Bank Institute show that before the end of 2020, Asians have experienced varying degrees of social mobility since the pandemic struck. Some people who reported having their consumption expenditures decline by a substantial amount during the first survey round already saw increased expenditure during the second round, while others have barely seen improvement. In particular, about 40% of those who reported having financial difficulty in the first round encountered just minor financial difficulty or no financial difficulty in the second round, while 1/3 of those who did not experience financial difficulty in the first round fell in such a situation in the second round. So in a number of economies like the Philippines and Thailand, the pandemic was more impactful for the poor, as shown in the growth rates in income or expenditure before and during the pandemic. Here, the yellow shaded cells represents instances when growth in a specific income decile is lower than the growth of overall mean, while green shaded cells represents the opposite. In 2021, there were some ground for optimism. Almost all economies in our region reported stronger growth rates in 2021 compared to 2020. Some suffered substantial economic loss in 2020, but managed to grow in 2021, undoing economic losses posted a year earlier. However, in several economies, the pace of growth in 2021 was not enough to undo the economic loss in 2020. Such diverse variation in economic growth paths point to widening inequality between economies. Nonetheless, using growth forecasts, our simulations show that despite setbacks caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, it is possible to reduce extreme and moderate poverty rate in developing Asia to less than 1% and 7% respectively by 2030. However, there are a number of uncertainties surrounding these projections. First, these are based on simplifying assumption that all households within an economy experience the same percentage decline in their per capita consumption expenditure and or income, as predicted based on GDP per capita growth numbers. As hinted earlier, for some economies where surveys conducted during pandemic years are available, lower income households experience greater proportional reduction in consumption. Hence, the neutral distribution assumption may underestimate pandemic's impact on poverty rates. Now, if we relax the neutral distribution assumption and consider different degrees of pro-poorness of growth, we can see that poverty reduction may be more pronounced if growth is pro-poor. By 2030, more than 40% of developing Asia's population may be economically secure, while a quarter may consume at least middle-class expenditures. However, if growth is not pro-poor, there might still be almost 2% of the region's population in extreme poverty by the SDG reckoning year in 2030. Even after relaxing the neutral distribution assumption, there are other sources of uncertainty surrounding our projections. For instance, economic growth outlook may be affected by looming threats of food security, energy price shocks, debt burden, geopolitical tensions, and other risk factors. Furthermore, assuming that societies with higher levels of social mobility prior to the pandemic can more easily revert to virtuous poverty reduction path, the pandemic may have also reshaped the social mobility regime itself, and its impact may manifest at a much later period. For instance, learning losses caused by school closures is an important development topic, yet its full implications on affected children's lifetime earnings and social mobility prospects may not come to light until later, as how it will unfold depends on a number of factors, such as effectiveness of remote education and how socioeconomic institutions react to undo the damage to children's learning and well-being. Estimates suggest that developing Asia's students' lifetime earning losses may range between 3.9% of pre-pandemic earnings under a high efficacy scenario to as much as 8.8% under a low efficacy scenario, and losses are expected to be much higher among the poor. So within each economy, inequality of opportunities between rich and poor may also further expand due to varying access to complementary remote learning tools, with estimates showing that students from the poorest wealth quintile are expected to have losses in future earnings which are up to 47% higher than of the richest students in their economy. On the other hand, the second panel shows areas with lower scores in social mobility enablers are more likely to experience higher relative lifetime earning losses. Disruptions caused by the pandemic might have also affected people's values and perceptions that could have implications on social mobility prospects. For instance, if we look at the region's labor force participation trends, there are hints that it has not bounced back to pre-pandemic levels. Whether labor force exiters will eventually come back to work or not, it depends on a number of factors, including their perception on distribution of economic opportunities. So there are studies showing that long unemployment spells may lead to discouraged job seekers, outdated skill sets, and even adversely affect one's mental health, which in turn may create a vicious cycle of economic inactivity. Regardless of uncertainty surrounding our projections, it is clear that there is a need to accelerate efforts to enhance social mobility prospects, especially for the poor. So there are two main factors which contribute to and influence a person's socioeconomic standing, or initial socioeconomic status and institutions. During crises such as the pandemic, human capital investments, credit markets, public investments, and even perceptions that may shape one's level of effort may be severely disrupted. While the better off may be able to mitigate these disruptions, the less well-off are unable to do so. Hence, structures of disadvantage may start crystallizing, making it more arduous for poor and socioeconomically vulnerable people to exit socioeconomic disadvantage. So it is essential that we mitigate that. On one area that we should work on is to ensure that we can sustain a more targeted social protection coverage as developing Asia shifts gear towards recovery and post-pandemic era. Even when pandemic-induced disruptions winds down, there are several risks such as debt, climate change, and political conflict that threaten the region's social mobility prospects. Those who are most vulnerable to such risks will still require access to instruments that can amplify their resilience to these compounding uncertainties. In 2020, while the proportion of poor who receive social assistance cash benefit increased relative to pre-pandemic levels, coverage among the poor remains low. On the other hand, results from the second wave surveys conducted by ADB suggest that almost 60% of respondents who did not receive assistance from government during the first year of pandemic were not aware of availability of assistance programs. This highlights the need to bring such services closer to those who need them most, but have challenges accessing such type of service. Moving forward, in addition to enhancing social protection system to amplify resilience, it is also important to improve our performance with respect to other factors that could drive long-term social mobility prospects. For instance, the region's development path since the turn of the millennium chronicles improved transportation networks, enhanced electricity generation capacity, and greater access to telecommunications and water infrastructure. Collectively, such improvements contributed to faster economic growth and poverty reduction prior to the COVID-19 crisis and may help expedite post-pandemic recovery. Despite this progress, disparities in access to key infrastructure and basic services still exist across this region, as noted on this slide. So, fostering greater innovation may also play a key role in enhancing social mobility prospects. Furthermore, we should also not lose focus on other important development challenges, such as climate change, if nobody is to be left behind. In the interest of time, I will stop here and I encourage everyone to check out our report, which provides more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for sharing a lot of interesting statistics there. At this point, let me invite everyone to please feel free to, if you have questions, feel free to ask them by typing them on the chat box. Later, we'll have opportunity also if you want to raise your hand later during the open forum. But in the meantime, let me give the screen to Daniel. As mentioned earlier, Daniel, on the other hand, will walk us through the key findings of special supplements, whereas Anne described to us a number of important development trends. Daniel will walk us through another aspect of our team, what our team has been doing on statistical capacity building, particularly with respect to promoting the use of innovative data. In Daniel's presentation, he will be talking about how we can leverage on social media data and natural language processing to explore different development topics. So over to you, Daniel.
Great. Thank you very much, Art, and also Anne, for this great presentation. It is my pleasure to present our recent research on natural language processing of social media text data, which is joint work by Stanley, Lawrence C., Jerry Beth Chang, Cedric Baswell, Alyssa Villanueva, and Kadra Said. The publication, a special supplement to the key indicators for Asia and the Pacific 2022 this year, introduces the foundations of natural language analysis and showcases studies that have applied techniques of natural language processing, NLP, to make progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. It also reviews specific NLP techniques and concepts supported by 2 case studies. The first case study analyzes public sentiments on the coronavirus disease in the Philippines, while the second case study explores the public debate on climate change in Australia. Please excuse for my voice. I have a cold, but I'll try my best that you have the opportunity to understand me. In this presentation, I will give a short introduction into the main report and one of the 2 case studies which share a common foundation that is outlined on the next slide. Namely sound economic research and policy making depend on timely and granular data. And the coronavirus disease pandemic further heightened, emphasized the need for real-time and comprehensive information. I think we can go on the next slide, With the advent of social media, allowing individuals to share and receive information, social media text data became a valuable source of timely and granular information. In turn, social media text data can be leveraged to map and track the behavior, opinions, concerns, expectations of citizens, respectively, can be used in policy making to enhance the quality of government by improving civic engagement, citizen participation in government, but also customer service. Natural language processing, the computational preparation and analysis of text data or natural language, user-generated content can be applied to study, for example, topics and sentiments in natural language, including social media text data or, again, user-generated content. The next slide, and in particular the figure, shows how we conducted this study and publication, and it also outlines this presentation. First, we reviewed research on NLP of social media text data in the context of specific SDGs. This review highlighted NLP applications as well as insights on development yielded in or previous research. Then we described how data is prepared and represented so it can be understood and processed by the computer. And then finally, we described the most commonly used NLP techniques among the research that we reviewed. These techniques include keyword extraction, topic modeling, but also sentiment analysis, which is potentially the most popular one. Let us start with a short summary of the main report, in particular its theoretical foundations related to communication. Communication is the process of sharing information, ideas, and attitudes by individuals. So it plays an important role in policy formulation and implementation, as it is part of gathering evidence, building awareness, and mobilizing support for policy. The key elements in communication include the message, the channel, the source, and the receiver. The message is the information being shared by the source to the receiver. In the context of our study, the message can be a post, a tweet, a comment, or a blog post, but in theory also a picture, for example, on Instagram. The channel is the method by which the message is sent. Possible channels include social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other online fora. The source is the entity deciding which message to share with another entity. The source can be communities who report on their situation or provide feedback on the policies that affect them. The source can also be an organization that provides information on policies. Finally, the receiver is the entity with which the message is intended to be shared with. To properly communicate, it is essential that the receiver is listening and understanding the message properly. In policy formulation and evaluation, the receiver can be the organization that gathers the message or feedback of the communities, while in policy implementation, the receiver can be the communities who need to be aware and informed on the adoption of a policy. The slide that we showed previously shows some of the SDGs supported by NLP. This is by no means comprehensive. Our goal is to give an idea on how NLP was used to support SDGs. And for this presentation, we will focus on studies related to SDG 1 and SDG 3. On SDG 1, poverty, Aurora and co-authors aimed to determine the link between life satisfaction and worries. Text classification and topic modeling was used to identify life satisfaction and worries, concerns from approximately 35,000 textual answers coming from the German socioeconomic panel study. Using text classification and topic modeling, the authors learned that the respondents' main concerns were the health of the family, unemployment, and finding a new job or employment. On SDG 3, health, the research group of 𝗦𝗶𝗶 and co-authors used geotagged Twitter posts from San Diego, California, to identify societies at risk for disease contamination and outbreaks. Through topic modeling and text classification, they identified keywords correlated with HIV risk. They found indicators of real-world contact between the Twitter users, which pose potential health dangers to the community. In particular, they used the follower-followee network to understand real-world user connections and prevention opportunities. Moreover, since user mentions are indicators of alternative communication between users, mentions in Twitter data could be used as an indicator for real-world connections between users. In these studies, as well as many others, NLP used to gather evidence and identify insights from large volumes of text data, and in most cases, social media text data. The main NLP techniques used were text classification, keyword extraction, document clustering, and topic modeling. I think we have a separate slide on this one. But of course, there are other NLP techniques applied, but these four are the major ones. So we included them in our report. Just as a side note here, as you can see, NLP, natural language processing, lives from insights from various disciplines, but majorly from linguistics, computer science, and artificial intelligence. Now let us turn to one of the two case studies on the COVID-19 pandemic in the Philippines. And as we all know, and since we were all affected, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused enormous challenges to the society, including the healthcare system and human health, as well as our economic system and economic prosperity in particular. And we heard about it a few minutes ago. In turn, consequentially, fighting the pandemic and mitigating its consequences has been a major determinant of research and policy agendas over the past 2 years, whereby researchers and policymakers, among many others, increasingly highlighted, accentuated the need for more timely and granular data. Thereby, data on individual level health, economic conditions, social environment, and cultural participation, all of which are linked in a way to sentiment among the public, appear to be of particular importance to define targeted and finally effective, or hopefully effective, measures, as well as to develop appropriate and sustainable solutions. One valuable resource to collect timely and granular data on public sentiment is social media. Social media evolved as a crucial intermediary for communication, allowing individuals to share and receive information directly. In turn, social media text data can be leveraged, and we discussed that, to map and track the behavior of citizens, respectively, can be used in policy making to enhance the quality of government. Finally, motivating this case study, in particular, we aim to map the sentiment among the public related to the COVID-19 pandemic using social media text data based on NLP. On a side note, and this is important to highlight, the case study has the objective to showcase the technique that we introduced in the report, and is less focused on the actual implications, because we have another focus in our study, respectively, policy implications derived from the data would require a much more nuanced or defined assessment and validation. So let us move to the foundation of the research, the data collection. For this research, we selected Twitter to collect social media text data. Twitter was selected based on data availability and market penetration. Twitter is a prominent social media platform in the Philippines with approximately 10.5 million estimated users in 2022. In our research, we leveraged the Twitter historical power track API to query data during August to December 2021. And it is not surprising that social media, the landscape of social media changes. To what extent Twitter is, as of now, more or less popular in the Philippines is a different question. However, at the time when we conducted the study, this was the case. We kept the search query to a minimum, including the location, namely the Philippines, the time period, namely May to December 2021, and the keywords related to the COVID-19 pandemic, such as, for example, COVID, finally resulting in a sample of approximately 28,000 tweets by approximately 11,000 Twitter users. Please note that the data come with some limitations, such as, for example, we refer to public tweets only, so no private tweets, and only approximately 1 to 2% of all tweets are geotagged, explaining the relatively low number of Twitter tweets considered in our study compared to the number of Twitter users in the Philippines that we observed. Next slide, please. Following the data collection, we pre-processed the data. The data pre-processing is decisive to convert unstructured social media text data or user-generated content in general to a meaningful text corpus that is transforming or removing elements that are irrelevant for the analysis. In our case, we applied a simple single-step approach, which includes the removal of extra white spaces, URLs, hashtags, and duplicate tweets. Data pre-processing in this case has been kept to a minimum because information from special characters, including, for example, punctuation marks, affect the computation of the sentiment. In the other case study that we present in the report, the pre-processing is much more demanding and complex, where we removed, for example, stop words or specific expressions that would disturb the analysis or would result also the result of the analysis, affect the result of the analysis. The pre-processing in this case resulted in a final sample of 28,000 tweets by 11,000 users. Now that we have pre-processed, cleaned the data set, we may turn to the analysis. Our objective is or was to analyze sentiment over time. Sentiment analysis can refer to diverse approaches whereby predefined dictionaries substantiate the most common, relevant, validated approaches. In this research, we refer to VADA. VADA is for Valence Aware Dictionary and Sentiment Reasoner, which is an open source, open access dictionary and rule-based sentiment classifier that uses a curated lexicon of words to determine the sentiment, and was applied in this case to identify the sentiment in the processed social media text data. From a practical perspective, words were compared with the human annotated Vader dictionary, consisting of 7,500 words, acronyms, slangs, among others, including their corresponding valence. Thereby, Vader considers lexical features such as, but not limited to, punctuations, capitalizations, emojis, and acronym usage that are relevant in analyzing social media text data. As you may know, for example, emojis are a common type of expression in social media text data and are commonly used when friends, family, and others communicate with one another. On a side note, there are various dictionaries for diverse languages, whereby not all languages have their own dictionary. So in our case, we refer to English tweets only, or English words only, because we have the limitation that we, at this point in time, cannot combine different dictionaries, respectively focused on one dictionary to avoid any inference or unintended consequences by using different text corpora samples for the purpose of using different dictionaries. But in general, that might be an approach to solve some of the issues that we have in the case of multiple or diverse languages in one text corpus. The data analysis was implemented in Python, and at the end, the Vader algorithm computes 4 scores for each tweet: positive, negative, neutral, and a compound or overall score. Here, I may present selected results of the descriptive analysis outlined on the next 2 slides. In this figure 1 shows daily tweet counts along with key events. So a tweet spike can be observed from mid-August to mid-September 2021, when COVID cases were high due to the Delta variant. After that period, COVID-related tweets decrease in number before increasing again in late December due to the Omicron variant. The next figure 2, shows a breakdown of figure 1 by positive and negative sentiment. Positive and negative sentiments are somewhat similar, with most tweets being recorded when the cases were high from mid-August to mid-December 8, and again in late December 2021. This shows that people reacted in different ways to the increase in COVID cases. But beyond those observations, the results, as mentioned, should be interpreted carefully, as we will discuss in more detail now or later in our discussion. So what can we say about the major implications and limitations of this study? The information, and we can go to the next slide, the information on sentiment related to the COVID-19 pandemic in the Philippines is potentially useful for policymakers when considering containment policies. For example, when policymakers aim to assess the public acceptance of a specific measure required for compliance of the public with the measure, sentiment analysis may serve as an early and timely signal guiding decision makers. Sentiment analysis can also provide another policy input, quantifying how Twitter users feel about the pandemic, could indicate the level of social tolerance toward further curbs or loosening of restrictions. Now let's address selected limitations and shortcomings, may be equally important because they outline the required next steps and may also serve as a good foundation for future learning. First, most obvious and most important, the observations are limited to Twitter users, which do not represent the entire population. Indeed, actually, Twitter is a very specific community, as it is the case for Instagram and Facebook. But data integration, linking different data sources, is actually important and would definitely enrich and help future analysis. One possible solution is to expand the data collection to a diverse range of social networks which serve different groups in society to obtain a more comprehensive mapping of sentiment among social media users. Second, also important, sentiment analysis does not consider context-dependent information such as location information and interactions such as, in our case, tweets, retweets, likes, and replies. But as mentioned, very important is that we miss information on the users. So what we typically collect in surveys, socio-demographic information such as age, income, family situation, income situation, employment, education is regularly missing in our cases. There are sometimes approaches to leverage the language use, the natural language used by the users as a signal for specific socio-demographic characteristics. So some users use specific words and then you can make some inference about their education or income class. However, for validation and assessment purposes, these approaches are not well explored based on my personal view, respectively might require further work when considering to integrate NLP or respective approaches in official statistics, or at least to support official statistics in collecting alternative data points. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention until this point in time. And I think we are all more than happy to also have the opportunity to discuss maybe some of your questions or comments later today. Thank you very much. And I may hand over to you, Art.
Great presentation, Daniel. Thank you very much. Towards the end of your presentation, you mentioned this notion of data integration, right? I think this is very important. This principle of combining traditional surveys, censuses with more innovative forms of data or big data, if I may, because this process complement each other, the strength of each data type, which is very important when we are in this business of understanding complex development challenge. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing the interesting work that the statistics team of ADB has been doing. All right, so at this point, let me open the floor for question and answer. I think there are a number of interesting questions from the chat box. So please feel free to raise your hand or type your question. Let me start with the question from Mr. Daniel Agustin. So one question that he asked is, it's related to when we talk about the business of poverty reduction and promotion of social mobility. We understand this is a complicated task, right? So in a way that entails a lot of intersectional development challenges. One of the questions from Mr. Agustin is that what kind of intervention should we be doing to be able to promote greater social mobility prospects, particularly for people who are at the lower segments of society, who tend to be the ones facing a lot of deprivations, socioeconomic disadvantage. And do you want to share your insights on that? In our KI report, we briefly alluded to this concept of undoing learning losses, because that's a very relevant problem that we confronted, especially during pandemic. Do you want to elaborate on that, Anne?
Yes, Art. Yes, actually, one intervention that the government and private sector can do is to immediately undo the learning losses. So in my slide earlier, in the slide 17, so there's a study in the of ADB 2022, which estimates that there's about a lifetime earning losses of developing Asia students that may range up to 3.9 to 8.8% pre-pandemic earnings. So especially in the areas with low scores for social mobility enablers, this is more likely to experience a higher relative lifetime earning losses, right? And also, it's important to note the inequality in the difference in the access to remote learning tools, which shows that under medium efficacy scenarios, students from the poorest wealth quintile have losses 47% higher than those students in the richest in the economy, right? And also, it is also in that study, it also shows that 28% girls may have experienced 28% more losses. I mean, learning losses, future earning losses compared to boys during that study. So it's important that we note to have an intervention on that.
Thank you very much. And indeed, undoing learning losses, that's an urgent concern that not only the Philippines, but a lot of even developed and developing countries have experienced, and this should be immediately addressed to be able to revert back to pre-pandemic social mobility prospects. And just to perhaps complement what Anne mentioned, again, in the context of reducing poverty, promoting social mobility, minimizing socioeconomic inequality, it is really important for development practitioners to approach it from multiple lenses, because as I've said earlier, poverty, it involves a lot of intersectional development challenges. One of the things that a lot of development practitioners are currently doing or exploring is this program called graduation approach. So what is the graduation approach? It's, in a way, it's an innovative holistic approach, which entails combining targeted social assistance with technical and life skills training, promoting financial inclusion. Coaching and mentoring is also part of the graduation approach. So in a way, you're implementing a comprehensive set of sequence intervention. It also includes productive asset transfers, temporary cash transfers, technical trainings, and so on. So this is, I think, if you approach it from a holistic perspective, like what the graduation approach is advocating, this is something that would definitely be beneficial, especially for the poor who are experiencing multiple forms of deprivation. Daniel, do you want to also weigh in, perhaps from a data perspective? What are the important challenges that we should address, especially if we're aiming to promote social mobility, perhaps relating it to this concept of integration of different types of data? How can we really harness on big data to be able to ensure that we are informing policymakers as they design programs to promote greater social mobility and faster poverty reduction?
Thank you very much, Art. Actually, I had not the chance to think about this particular question in advance, but the beauty of data science is that we regularly focus on micro level data. Yeah, and as we have access to micro level data, it regularly helps us to define more customized, tailored, individualized programs and treatments. So as we have more information about the individual, that might help us in turn to design targeted programs. Maybe at the end, not for single individuals, but for very specific and defined groups within the society and population. And even if we do not or should not use the micro level data that we have access to for the rollout of the program, it may definitely, because this is also a privacy aspect, but it may definitely help us to define or to design the program in advance, considering different life conditions and situations. And another aspect of it is that beyond the typical characteristics that we collect via surveys, census data, novel data opportunities allow us also to focus or leverage previously unexplored characteristics, but characteristics that might be important. We can start with satellite images. If we have satellite images and detailed information on the living conditions, at least serving as a validation metric that may help us, or exploring regions that we do not regularly have access to due to various reasons. Yeah. So I think the new data sources, micro-level data, in a nutshell, can help us to define more targeted or customized programs at the end. But maybe this is only one element that may play a role here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think that's a good segue to the question of Mr. Brian Rafor. So part of his question, he was asking, he's familiar with a work we did in partnership with the Philippine Statistics Authority, where we also use innovative data, particularly satellite imagery, in the context of poverty mapping. So just to perhaps, before I focus on the first part of Brian's question. So if I may just elaborate and complement what you mentioned, Daniel, right. So in the case of that project that we did in partnership with the Philippine Statistics Authority, so traditionally official poverty statistics that is compiled using household surveys of income and expenditures. And we know conducting this type of survey, it's not very cheap, right? It may cost substantial resources, especially if you want to provide granular estimates, which is necessary if you're designing programs and you want to identify which areas should have more intervention because they have significant substantial pockets of poverty. Therefore, you need reliable estimate of poverty for that geographic area. However, in the context of compiling poverty statistics using household surveys, to be able to arrive to that level of granularity, you need to increase sample size. And as I've said, that's not usually practical from the perspectives of many national statistics offices, because you will have to incur substantial cost doing that. So in that project that we did with the Philippine Statistics Authority and other development partners, is we integrated household survey data, census data with satellite imagery. And the principle is to train computer vision algorithm such that once you feed the algorithm with an image of a specific area, then that algorithm in principle could predict the level of poverty based on the image features. So in a way, we work with, as I've said, we work with the Philippine Statistics Authority to be able to pilot test that methodology. And in fact, when ADB implemented a food relief program at the height of the pandemic in 2020, I think it was around first or second quarter of that year, when we identified which areas needed prioritization to receive the food relief program that was implemented by the bank in partnership with the Philippine government, the granular poverty maps from that approach using surveys, censuses, and satellite imagery were used to be able to target. So yeah, that's the beauty of integrating multiple data sources. So if I may just go back to you, Daniel, because part of the question of Brian is also asking, how about social media data? Are there ongoing studies where social media data are being used in the context of, perhaps he mentioned about poverty-related targets of the SDGs. So perhaps you could elaborate on the different case studies that were featured in the KI special supplement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Art, and of course, Brian, for this great question. Key takeaway is that I have to come back to you to provide a very specific reply if there was a previous study. As of now, I'm not aware of a specific study on the relation of poverty and NLP indicators. But there are some facets or perspectives on that question. First, there are various studies in the context of NLP and linking NLP metrics to diverse outcomes in the context of life satisfaction, well-being, etc. Most of them use simple correlations to assess or study the relationship, but causal effects or causal relations is not the appropriate term here, but the causal link is not always given in those studies. So one has to be a bit careful when reviewing them for specific purposes. Then it depends heavily on the method regarding the metrics that you are interested in. The typical dictionaries that are applied for text classification do not capture specific poverty-related metrics. Some of the more advanced ones relate to very basic socio-demographic characteristics, so that you can say something about habits in life. So, for example, if they use more complex words or more words related to religion, to leisure, to money or something like that, yeah, that is possible. But a specific dedicated metric for poverty is missing. Of course, you can try to create your own dictionary with words that are related to poverty, which is potentially a separate research project within your research, given that any kind of dictionary has to be validated, it has to be designed in a way that it reflects the natural language used by a community, and similar related aspects. So dictionaries have to be validated, and if you would like to create a poverty-related dictionary, the same applies. And then linking it to other outcomes, whatever it is then subject to a more empirical or econometric challenge that has to be mastered. But that is, I think, a different story. The major challenge is actually to measure it, and of course to have access to a good data source where you can collect natural language or the way people communicate. But regularly, as a side note or on a side note, researchers try to get access to, let's say, to the major social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, etc. But there is also an increasing interest in collecting actually micro-level data, so small study populations where you can collect data from their bilateral or n-lateral text messaging systems, whatever they use, to focus on the data, because data access to large social media networks is sometimes a challenge.
Thank
And
you very
regarding
much.
the general question, I will double check and will come back to you. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, Daniel. I see one hand raised from Sir Van. Sir Van, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I'm also very interested with using NLP as an alternative source of information. I'm just curious. So I've been doing literature review as well of the recent studies that is done similar to the case study, and I've always observed that when we measure sentiment, we always focus on the tweet. So I'm curious if for the case study, would the trend significantly change if we instead focus on the count of the users with negative, positive sentiment versus the count of the tweets? Because I feel that we could be double counting the sentiment if a particular user is making a lot of tweets about a topic. That's my question.
Yep. Thank you very much for that question. Also an important one. It relates to weighting and aggregating data points. And my honest answer is it depends on your objective. For reasons of representation, it would make sense to aggregate on a, let's say, user ID level. On the user ID level, yeah, so that you remove observations from users with a high intention to tweet, yeah. So because that would bias the time series. If you have one and you have one users with 1,000 tweets a day and another 1,000 users with 1 tweet a day, that one user with 1,000 tweets a day would definitely bias the time series. So it depends a bit. However, considering that in most social networks, a few users have the power to shape the network and have influence, so serving as an influencer, it might be appropriate to weigh this particular user with a high influence because of whatever reason, maybe he tweets or she tweets a lot over the day, to reflect this appropriately and not aggregating your observations on a user level. So it depends. There is not a one-fits-all solution, I would say.
Thanks
Hopefully
a lot.
this answers your question, but if not, please feel to come in again.
All right. Thanks a lot, Daniel. Last week you attended the UN Big Data Conference, right? Organized obviously by UN and the Stats Office of Indonesia. What is your sense? Because Mr. John Burwell is asking, is the use of big data, including social media data, increasing, particularly among development practitioners? So did you see increased use of such data, especially based on what you've heard or came across during the UN Big Data Conference? Any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Art. This is only my very personal view and not necessarily complete and correct. But at the moment, I would say it's not increasing, it's only high. Yeah. But as of now, or right now, the focus is actually on making methodological improvements and accessing data, because that is the major bottleneck, accessing good, high quality data, and also on the method side to improve dictionaries, to capture more diverse language use and languages used, So I would say the focus is a bit different, but nevertheless, the interest is high, because what people talk about in daily life is relevant for policymaking and research. And if we have access to what people are talking about, what they think, what they express is important, no question. But again, as of now, maybe the focus is a bit different, but this is only my personal view. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. How about, do you want to weigh in? Because as I've hinted earlier, so a lot of development organizations, including ADB, right? We do a lot of statistical capacity building work. We're promoting this harnessing complementarities between traditional data sources, surveys, etc., with big data. What are the, from your perspectives, what are the challenges, in particularly from the perspective of government offices or national statistics offices, that in a way hamper their greater use of this innovative data? Or in other words, perhaps another way of asking that question is, which areas should we focus on if we want to accelerate this new paradigm of complementing multiple data sources for the purpose of compiling development indicators? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Art. Also, a high-level question in a way, and I do not feel that comfortable to answer this question in a very comprehensive way, but I think one step forward would be to define a kind of integrated data ecosystem, or at least a strategy on the national level, and to integrate diverse stakeholders, including the private sector, but also the civil society. Because at the end, if we work with micro-level data, people have to understand why we are working with the data. What is the underlying objective, purpose? Why is it finally good? In particular, when we consider policy implications that we derive based on the data. So there has to be awareness, a layer of sensitivity, but also, of course, from a policy perspective, the willingness to progress and to move forward. So my very basic answer would be to define a foundation that is grounded in society, and integrates diverse stakeholders, including civil society and the private sector, because most of the private sector companies own or collect the data that we would like to benefit from for research and development. And taking this as a starting point might be good. And of course, leveraging insights from academia and bringing them to the table, because at the end we require scientific insights to work with the data in a responsible way, both from a methodological perspective, but also from an ethical perspective. So they should accompany the process, and should maybe also guide the process in a positive way.
Great insights, Daniel. Sir Van also added, he thinks that ethics and boundaries of using social media data for policy should also be defined. And I think this also applies not only for social media data, but also for other types of data, right? Big data. And I'm pleased to note that development organizations, including ADB, were working together to be able to develop statistical guidelines on using this different sources of data for different contexts. So for example, what are the nuances when you have to use satellite imagery data, or what are the technical nuances when you have to use social media data and other types of big data, both from the technical perspective as well as from the practical perspectives. So earlier, Daniel alluded to, it has to be approached from it has to embrace a multi-sectoral approach, because it's not only the business of development organization, nor it's just a business of national statistics offices or government agencies compiling indicators, right? You have to have insights from sector specialists, from economists, from social scientists, from policymakers. All of this have to convene together if we are going to advance this use of big data, innovative data. We're almost near the 90-minute mark, so perhaps before I turn it over back to Dr. Jeannie, if I may request any final thoughts, perhaps we could start from Anne. Any final thoughts that you want to impart to our 100 plus audience tonight? Anne, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, now.
Yes, go ahead.
I think the apparent recovery process of the Asia and the Pacific countries may not be linear. So it is unprecedented socio-economic impacts of COVID-19 pandemic may require a long-term perspective in Asia and the Pacific as we navigate our way forward. So the pandemic responses must not focus only on the short-term solutions, rather on transitory problems. So our policy should also embrace ongoing resilience on innovation and inclusiveness to deliver frameworks to improve the lives of our society, especially the most vulnerable sector of our economy.
Thanks, Anne. Daniel, any final perspectives on the use of social media data or big data in general?
Thank you very much, Art and Anne. Nothing substantial to supplement here, but I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with our statistics colleagues and beyond. So that is highly appreciated, and definitely looking forward to future knowledge exchange and discussions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne and Daniel. I missed out to address, I think there was a question on, because earlier when Anne was presenting about learning losses, so she alluded to this finding from the ADB study about the disparities between learning losses incurred by boys and girls. In some cases, girls, in that regard, girls were a little disadvantaged. So what is the reason for that? I think in some countries, because like girls tend to have less access to remote learning tools, that contributes to greater learning losses. And in some cases also, particularly in patriarchal societies, right? There's more preference to advance development outcomes for men, or there's a tendency for development outcomes to be more prioritized for men, and that's partly contributing to that disparities in terms of learning losses. But anyhow, we are happy to provide more details on that bilaterally. So if you're interested to learn more about the issue on social mobility prospects, learning losses, its implication to income prospects in the future of these students incurring learning or experiencing learning disruptions because of COVID-19 pandemic, we're happy to connect you. We have within the research department of ADB, there is a dedicated team working in this area. So with that, again, thank you very much to everyone for your active participation. We've learned a lot from the question and interactions with you. Thanks, Anne and Daniel, and of course the organizers, Dr. Jeannie, Sir Gian, and the rest of the UP statistics community. So with that, if I may revert back to either Dr. Jeannie or Sir Gian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much also, Sir Art. I think now's a good time to show our sincerest appreciation also for the team of Asian Development Bank by awarding our certificates of appreciation. So allow me to read our certificate of appreciation. UP School of Statistics awards this certificate of appreciation to Arturo Martinez Jr., Rose Andumayas, and Daniel Boller for the excellent discussion on highlights of ADB's key indicators for Asia and the Pacific as part of the UP Stat Colloquium on the Statistical Sciences, given this 21st day of November 2022 via Zoom. This is signed by our Director for Research, Dr. Imogen F. Evidente, and the Dean of the UP School of Statistics, Dr. Joseph Ryan G. Lansangan. So again, thank you very much. And for our audience, let's show our deepest appreciation and gratitude also to our esteemed speakers. Let's all give them a warm round of virtual applause and reactions. They surely deserve it for a meaningful discussion we just had. Thank you very much again. And at this point, may I invite everyone, our dear participants, our Asian Development Bank team, and the team of UP School of Statistics to turn on their videos. Let's show our smiles, our bright faces. Let's see the persons behind those boxes as we take a quick picture taking of today's event. So a little remembrance. This will not be posted anywhere. So this will just be for the documentation purposes of the school. So again, may I invite everyone to turn on their cameras, their videos, show their smiles, and we will have Sir Jo Marie to assist us with the documentation. Anytime you're ready, Sir Jo Marie.
Ayan, let's take a picture po.
All right.
So we have 5 pages. Okay, so first page po muna, no? Okay. Ayan. 1, 2, 3, smile. Second page. 1, 2, 3, smile.
You can also put your reactions.
Yes. Third page. 1, 2, 3, smile. Fourth page. 1, 2, 3, smile. And then last page, 1, 2, 3, smile. Ayan. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. It's good to see those faces behind the Zoom boxes. So, and thank you very much also for coming in our colloquium today. All right, so electronic certificates of participation will be awarded to all the attendees. However, you must be present for 75%, at least 75% of the activity's duration to receive a certificate of participation. And these certificates will be sent to your registered email address, the one you used in here to register in Zoom, within 3 working days. Also, your feedback matters to us. We would like to hear and listen to your comments, to your suggestions, and to your insights. So please kindly email us for any inquiries, for any feedback. You can email us at statresearch.upd@up.edu.ph. So we will be having different events, because this Stat Speaks is a series of events. And with that, I would also like to invite everyone for our next activity. So this will be part not of our colloquium series, but our professorial chair lecture series. This will be on December 1. That's 5:00 p.m. to 6:00 p.m. We will be hearing one of the presentations of one of our professorial chair holder in statistics, Dr. Michael Daniel C. Lucagbo, also a professor in the UP School of Statistics, as he discusses his research paper on in vitro dissolution profile comparison. So surely this will be an exciting and thrilling discussion. So I hope to see everyone. You may register via the link provided in the chat box. So that's tinyurl.com/statspeaks120122. All right, so we're hoping to see you there and register for the event so that you'll receive the Zoom details. Again, thank you very much for attending the Stats Speaks series. For any future updates, if you want to be updated with the school's activities, with the school's announcements, with the school's research events, then you can subscribe to our mailing list. So you will receive those in your mail. You can subscribe via bit.ly/upstat mailing list. Again, the links are provided. You can click them on your chat box. So you can subscribe there, or you can like our official Facebook page at facebook.com/updstat. So we update that from time to time. You also respond to the messages given to the page. So you can also communicate with us for any other concerns or inquiries via our Facebook page. Again, the links you may copy, you may click in the chat box. All right, that's it, everyone. Thank you very much again for joining us today. It was truly an enlightening afternoon for all of us. Keep safe, everyone, and so long. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you, team.
and
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Joseph. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
po.
Thank you.
Thanks, GN.
Thanks, ma'am.
Thank you, Jo Marie. Nandito ba si Jo Marie?
Hello po. You're welcome po, ma'am. Anytime po.
Alright. Salamat. Thanks also to everyone.